welcome back. And I want to start today with a phone call. Not a real one, not one specific family, but a call I have taken some versions of more times than I care to count over 35 plus years. It's a homeowner, and their voice has that particular flatness people get when they are frightened and trying very hard to sound calm. And they say something like this: Bill, I got a certified letter today. There's a claim against my house from a lumber yard. I have never spoken to a lumber yard in my life. And then comes the part that gets me every time. I paid my contractor. I paid him on time. Every single draw. I have the canceled checks. So let's sit with that for a second, because it's the whole reason this episode exists. You can do everything right. You can be the most responsible, most organized, most on-time paying homeowner in your entire county. You can have a folder with every receipt in it, and a company you have never met, that you'd never hired, can file a legal claim against the roof over your head. That is a mechanic's lien. And I know that sounds outrageous the first time you hear it. Now, here's what I need you to understand before we go one step further. Because if you take nothing else from today, take this. The lien system is not a scam. It's not a loophole. It was not built to trap homeowners. It was built to make sure the guy who framed your walls gets paid for framing your walls. So think about it from his side of the fence for just a minute. A framer shows up. He's working for your general contractor as a subcontractor, for example. He puts his crew on your job for 3 weeks. He buys the lumber. He pays his guys every Friday out of his own pocket. And he hands you a completed structure. He can't take it back. He can't repossess your framing. Once that work is in your house, it is in your house forever. So the law gives him a claim against the thing he improved. So he isn't left holding nothing but an invoice and a prayer. The lien process protects the little guy. And this is the part almost nobody tells homeowners. The exact same process, run correctly, protects you. So I'm going to give you 5 things today. 1, what a lien actually is in plain English and how far it can really go. 2, the preliminary notice. The piece of mail that looks kind of scary and is actually the single most useful document you'll receive during your whole project. And then 3, the lien release. This is the habit I'm talking about. This is the whole ball game. Money goes out, signed paper comes back. And then 4, how the window closes at the end of your project and what you actually do if a lien does land on you. And then 5, because I've spent my career on the other side of this table, how subcontractors and suppliers use this same system to protect themselves and why knowing that makes you a smarter person to hire. So one housekeeping note before we start. I'm not a lawyer. I've never claimed to be. My experience is built on 35 plus years of building homes, remodeling homes, and dealing with this process in the real world. Rules vary state to state, sometimes dramatically. So if you are in the middle of a live dispute, go get a real estate attorney. My job is to make sure you know this exists and you know what to ask. Let's get after it. Let's define the word, because the word does most of the damage. A lien is a legal claim by one person against another person's property to secure payment of a debt. That's it. That's the definition. It attaches a debt to a piece of real estate. Now apply that to your project. Companies and individuals who provide labor and materials to a real property, and your home is a real property, have a right to collect what they're owed once that material is delivered or work is performed. Not once they've been thanked, not once everybody feels good about it, once the work is done. So who can do this? And it's broader than most people assume. Your general contractor can if you don't pay them. Subcontractors can. And your framer, your electrician, your plumber, your drywall crew. Material suppliers can. The lumber yard, the cabinet shop, the truss company, the concrete plant. In a lot of places, design professionals can also file a lien on your property. Your architect, your engineer. Notice what's missing from this list. A contract with you. That's the wrinkle here. Your agreement is with your general contractor usually. You're usually hiring a home builder or a general contractor to build your home, and under them they have the subs and suppliers that have agreements with him. You never signed anything with the lumber yard. But the lumberyard's product is sitting inside your walls, and the law says that gives them the standing to file any type of lien on your property if they don't get paid. So how bad can it really get? At the far end, and I want to be honest with you here, at the far end, an unpaid claimant who follows every step of the process to the letter can go to court and ask that your property be sold to satisfy the debt. A forced sale. That is kind of like the nuclear option here. And also being equally honest about this, it's pretty rare, genuinely rare. In 35 plus years, I can't count the times I've seen it anywhere near them. But rare is not the same as harmless. And this is where people underestimate a lien. A lien clouds your title, the title on your property. So let me translate that. A cloud on title means that when you go to sell your house, escrow will not close until that lien is resolved. When you go to refinance, and a lot of people building or remodeling are planning to convert a construction loan into permanent financing, at the end, the lender will look at a title, see an unresolved claim, and stop, not negotiate, flat out stop. So the real damage of a lien usually isn't a sheriff at your door. It's the day you're sitting at a closing table or waiting on a refinance that's going to save you $600 a month. And everything just freezes over a bill you already paid once. That's the scenario I want to make impossible for you. So let me put faces on it here, because abstractions really it's hard for those to stick. You heard me talk about Ben and Jane before, and I've got my little my fictional story about Ben and Jane and the McMillans. And Ben and Jane were my cautionary couple, the ones who do the reasonable thing at every fork and still end up in the ditch. Picture their version of this. Ben and Jane are doing a big addition on their home. Their contractor is friendly, he's responsive, he shows up. They pay every draw on time. Jane is the kind of person who pays a day early even. About 4 months in, an envelope arrives from a truss manufacturer. It's official looking, there's a number on it, and Ben reads the first paragraph, decides it's not addressed to him in any way that matters, and puts it in a drawer with the appliance manuals. The job finishes. It looks great. They pay the final draw, and they take everybody's picture in the new kitchen. 9 months later, they go to refinance, and the title search turns up a mechanic's lien from that truss manufacturer because their contractor, who was not a crook, who was just running behind and robbing one job to pay another, never settled that account. Ben and Jane did not do really anything wrong. They paid every dollar they owed. Their only mistake was in the drawer 4 months in. And one more thing while we're here, because I think it matters for your peace of mind. If a preliminary notice shows up in your mailbox, and we're going to talk about those next, that is not a sign your contractor is a crook. It's not an accusation. It is a standard business practice for a well-run supply company or subcontractor. Some of the best, most reputable suppliers I've ever worked with file notices on every single job without exception, and as a matter of policy. It's a paperwork discipline, not a character judgment. A lien only happens when somebody doesn't get paid. So the whole game, the entire game, is making sure everybody gets paid and being able to prove it. Which brings us to the piece of mail most homeowners open, misread, and throw away. So here's how this usually goes. Your project starts. Week 1. A truck backs up your driveway and drops a load of lumber. Beautiful. Things are happening. You take a picture and you send it to your mother. 10 days later, an envelope shows up. Certified mail. Official looking. And inside is a document from a lumber company you've never heard of, with your name on it, your address on it, a dollar figure, and language about lien rights, and your stomach kind of drops. I want you to have a completely different reaction to that envelope. I want you to feel relief, because what you are looking at is not a threat. What you are holding is a roster. In my state, and that's California, that document is called a preliminary 20-day notice. In other places, it goes by different names: a notice to owner, a notice of furnishing, a pre-lien notice, same animal. It is a formal heads up sent early in the job that says, I am furnishing labor and materials to your property, and I am preserving my right to make a claim if I don't get paid. So let's break down the mechanics because they really matter a lot. Who sends it? The people who don't have a contract with you, the subs and the suppliers. Your general contractor typically doesn't have to send one because he contracted directly with you. You already know he exists. There's an exception worth knowing. If there's a construction lender involved on your project, your general contractor generally does have to send one to protect his own rights with that lender in the picture. So who it goes to? You, the property owner, the general contractor, and the construction lender if there is one. Everybody with money in the game gets a copy. And how it's sent is certified mail, return receipt, or hand delivered. There's a reason for that formality. The sender needs to be able to prove you received it, which means, by the way, that if you're the one sending these, keeping that green card is not really optional. And now the piece that really matters to you, the timing. The notice has a clock on it. In my state, it's 20 days from the first time that company delivers material or performs work. Other states run different windows. Some are shorter, some stretch out much further. And a handful of states don't require preliminary notices at all, which frankly leaves homeowners there with less visibility, not more. So look up your state. That's a 15-minute job, and it's worth doing. But watch what happens when somebody misses that window, because this is the part that surprises people. If the notice is late, the sender doesn't necessarily lose everything. In my state, what they lose is the back end. A late notice generally only reaches back a limited number of days before the day that they sent it. So picture a lumberyard that delivers a big package to your home 3 months ago, forgot to file, and then wakes up and sends the notice today. That old delivery, generally it's outside their reach. They protected the recent stuff and let the rest go. So it's absolutely imperative that the subcontractors and suppliers, if they want to protect themselves in being sure that they collect their money, have a strict time limit after the day they deliver the materials or the day that they started construction. And if they surpass that time limit, they've basically relinquished any protection to collect that money, and it has to be done by certified mail. So if you don't get any preliminary notices, the odds are nobody filed them, but we'll get to that later. So now, I'm not telling you that so you can hope your suppliers are disorganized. I'm telling you because it explains something you'll see in the real world. Notices that show up late, notices that show up for smaller amounts than you expected, and notices that never show up at all. Plenty of subs and suppliers skip them entirely, usually because they've worked with your GC for 15 years and they trust them. That's kind of human nature. It's also a gap in your visibility, though, and we'll close that gap in a few minutes. So let's talk about what you actually do with these envelopes. There's 3 things. First, you keep every single one, not in a pile on the counter, in one folder, physical or digital, that is only for this. Every notice in one place for the life of your project, okay? Second, you read what's on it, the company name, what they're providing, and the dollar amount they've noticed for. That's your roster of subcontractors and suppliers that have interest in your property and that are just working on your property. Those are the people who could potentially make a claim against your home. You now know who they are, which, and this is the whole gift of the system, you would otherwise have no practical way of really knowing. You hired one company. That company might bring 25 businesses onto your property. You cannot track all of them. The notice tracks them for you. Now, let's compare that to the McMillans in my Tale of Two Homeowners story, who I've held up before as the family that did this the right way. Same envelopes, completely different outcome. And the only difference was about 90 seconds of behavior. Every notice that came in went into one accordion folder in the kitchen, and it never went anywhere else. Nothing fancy, really. No spreadsheet, no software, one folder. By the end of their build, there were 11 notices in there, 11 companies they had never signed a thing with, all of whom had a potential claim against their home, and all of whom they could name. That folder is why their project closed clean. Not because they were suspicious of anybody, but because when it came time to write checks, They knew who was standing behind the general contractor. That's the whole difference between Ben and Jane's drawer and the McMillan's folder. Same mail, same industry, one habit. And then third, and this is where passive becomes active. You match that roster against your payments, because now when your contractor comes to you for the next progress payment, you are not guessing. You have names, and names are what let you ask the right question, which is exactly where we're going next, because the notice tells you who could file. The release is what makes sure they never do. So if you remember one thing from this entire episode, remember this sentence: money goes out, signed paper comes back. That's it. That's the discipline. It's not complicated. It is not adversarial. It is not expensive. And it is the difference between a project that closes clean and a project that follows you around for a year. A lien release, you'll also hear it called a lien waiver, is a signed document in which a contractor, subcontractor, or supplier gives up their right to make a claim against your property for a specific chunk of work in exchange for being paid for it. So here's the piece of leverage most homeowners never realize they're holding. Only the party who has the rights can release them. Your general contractor cannot sign away the lumberyard's rights. Nobody can release a claim on somebody else's behalf. So if you want a release from a supplier, somebody actually has to pay that supplier in order to get the release. So watch what that does. You get a notice from the lumberyard. 2 weeks later, your contractor comes to you for a draw, for a payment. You say warmly, no drama at all, absolutely, can you bring me a release from the lumberyard with it? Now your contractor has to go pay that lumberyard, get the signed release, and bring it back to you. The money you're handing over has to actually travel down the chain before the check clears the room. You didn't accuse anybody of anything. You didn't have a confrontation. You just closed the loop. Now let's get into the types, because there are 4 common flavors, and mixing them up is where people really get hurt. Okay, the first split is conditional versus unconditional. A conditional release takes effect only when the payment actually clears. It's got a condition on it, hence the name. If the check bounces, the rights snap right back into place. An unconditional release takes effect the moment it's signed. Done. Rights gone, regardless of whether the money ever showed up. The second split is progress versus final. A progress release covers one specific payment for one specific chunk of work through a specific date. A final release covers everything, the whole job, all of it, forever. Put those together and you get 4 documents. And here's how you use them as a homeowner. Your goal is to end up holding unconditional releases at the end of your project or during the project after payment has been processed. An unconditional release is a signed statement that they have the money in hand, meaning your subs or your suppliers have actually received the money. And now they're comfortable signing it unconditional or relinquishing their rights. That's the strongest position that you can be in. In practice, the clean sequence looks like this. You hand over the payment and receive a conditional release with it. This becomes effective when the money lands. Then, once the funds have actually cleared, you collect the unconditional version. Money out, conditional in hand, funds clear, unconditional in hand. That's the full loop. And on a large project, it's absolutely worth running. So if you want to shortcut the whole thing on a payment that's making you nervous, there's a tool for that too, the joint check. You make the check payable to your contractor and the supplier together. Both signatures required to cash it. The money physically cannot go anywhere else. It's not a hostile move. It's used constantly in this industry, and it eliminates the question really entirely. Now, that's not necessarily your first go-to when you're working with a general contractor. The only time, in my opinion, that the joint check or two-party check comes into play is when you are concerned or have some history now with your contractor where you're beginning to grow concerned on whether your contractor is paying your subs and your suppliers on time or at all. So Keep that in your back pocket, but I wouldn't go there right out of the chute because it can become a little adversarial when you do that in some instances. So let me put the same lens on the other side of that document for a second, because it will make you a better partner to the people working on your house. For a subcontractor, signing the wrong release is a career-grade mistake. If a sub signs an unconditional release before the check is cleared and that check goes bad, their protection is gone, vanished. Their only path left is a lawsuit. And a final release signed while retention is still being held, money the owner is holding back until the very end, can wipe out their claim to money they haven't received yet. So if a subcontractor on your job asks to hand you a conditional release now and the unconditional one after the funds clear, that's not somebody being difficult. That's somebody who runs a professional shop. Say yes, it costs you nothing, and you still end up holding the paper you want. So in many cases, when you're dealing with a very reputable general contractor, it's not uncommon to just skip the conditional process and just simply ask for an unconditional. Now, if the contractor balks at that, it's probably because he doesn't have the cash flow, or your subcontractor doesn't have the cash flow to support those few days to just pay their supplier, get an unconditional, then come and get their check. So it doesn't hurt to ask for unconditional out of the chute to see if they're able to do that. Now, when you get into really big amounts, that's sometimes not possible. But don't be afraid to skip the conditional and just go right to unconditional, and it just eliminates all of the back and forth. So there's two more habits, and then we'll move on here. Habit 1, and bring this up at the contract stage, not at the crisis stage. When you're sitting down before anything is signed, ask your contractor exactly this. Tell me more about pre-liens and releases and how your company handles them. So I'm going to tell you what happens when you ask that question, because I've been on the receiving end of it. A good contractor's shoulders drop about an inch because you just told him you're organized, you're informed, and you're not going to be a problem at draw time. He'll walk you through his process. A contractor who gets cagey, changes the subject, or tells you not to worry about it, you just learned something very valuable for the price of one question. As your project wraps up, request releases from all of the subcontractors and suppliers, and I mean the ones who never even sent you a notice too, especially those. The ones who filed a notice are visible to you. The ones who didn't are invisible, and invisible is the one you don't want to discover at the closing table. All right, so your project's almost done. Punch list, final walkthrough, you're picking out furniture. There's one more piece of the lien picture to understand, and it's the part that ends the exposure. At the end of a job, there are documents that formally declare the work complete and get recorded at the county or city level in some cases. A notice of completion is the big one. A certificate of occupancy is the other milestone you'll hear about. Recording that completion document does something important for you. It starts a countdown. Now, this is not necessarily standard operating procedure for a general contractor or even a homeowner, because they don't even know it can be done, but I'm bringing this to your attention so that you can have whole nother layer of security and protection. So a notice of completion starts a countdown, and once it's recorded, anybody who wants to make a claim has a defined and much shorter window to do it. Without it, the window runs longer and everybody just sort of waits. So the shape of it is this. Without a recorded document, claimants generally have a fairly long runway after the job is done. Think a matter of months. Once completion is recorded, that runway shrinks dramatically, and it shrinks differently depending on who's filing. Your general contractor typically gets a somewhat longer window than the subs and the suppliers do. In my state, the subs window gets very short indeed. And I'm deliberately not throwing exact day counts out at you for every scenario, because this varies enough state to state that a number could be flat out wrong where you live. So what I want you to walk away with is this concept. Recording completion promptly starts a clock that ends your exposure. In a lot of places, there's a limited window to record it after the work is actually finished. So it's not something to get to eventually. So here's your closeout sequence, and I'd write this one down. Before your release final payment, before, not after. You pull out that folder. You go through every notice you collected. You check each one against a release. You request releases from the rest. And only when that's reconciled does the last check leave your hands. Final payment is your last piece of leverage. And once it's gone, it's gone. Spend it on paper. Now, what if you did everything right or close to it and a lien lands anyway? First, don't panic and don't ignore it. Ignoring it is the only genuinely bad option because a lien sitting quietly on your title is still doing damage every day. Call your general contractor today. Most of the time, and I mean most of the time, this is a payment dispute between the GC and the sub or supplier that has spilled over onto you. And the GC can resolve it. When they get paid, they file a release that clears it off of your property. If that doesn't work, understand that these claims don't live forever. A recorded lien has to be enforced in court within a defined window, or it goes stale. In a lot of states, you can formally demand that the claimant either sue or drop it, which either forces the issue or ends it. There's also a tool called bonding off the lien. You obtain a surety bond, and the claim moves off your property and attaches to the bond instead. Your title is clear, your sale or refinance can proceed, and the dispute continues without your house as the hostage. It costs money, and it doesn't settle who's right. But if you're staring at a closing date, it is exactly the right tool. And this is the point where I hand you off. Get a real estate or construction attorney, not a general practitioner, somebody who does this. One consultation is cheap compared to what's at stake here. This is genuinely their arena, not mine. So I want to close a loop on something because I've spent, again, 35 years on this contractor's side of this table, and I think it'll change how you see this whole thing. Everything we just walked through, the notice, the deadlines, the releases, it is not a homeowner protection system that subs happen to be caught up in. It's a subcontractor and supplier protection system that happens to protect homeowners beautifully as a side effect. But here's what that looks like from a small business side. A subcontractor's single biggest risk is not doing bad work. It's doing good work and not getting paid for it. Payroll doesn't wait. So the discipline for them is send the preliminary notice on every job early, whether or not they think they'll need it. Certified mail, keep the receipt, calendar the deadlines, because those deadlines do not bend. Miss one by a day, and a legitimate claim for real money simply evaporates. Never sign an unconditional release before the money clears. Never sign a final release while retention is still outstanding. Now, why should you care about any of that? Because it's a competency signal. The supplier sends you a crisp preliminary notice 10 days into your job. You have just learned that this is a business with systems. Somebody over there is tracking deliveries, calendaring deadlines, and running a tight ship. This is exactly the kind of company you want inside your walls. And the flip side is worth knowing too. A trade that operates on nothing but handshakes and good intentions, no paperwork, no notices, no releases, don't worry about all that. Maybe a lovely human being, but loose paperwork and loose everything else tends to travel together. So flip the whole frame. Those envelopes aren't the industry coming after you. They're the industry showing you its books. I'll give you one more marker to listen for, and then we'll wrap it up here. You've heard me talk about Ace the Builder, the contractor I hold up as the standard sometimes. There's one move Ace makes that I want you to watch for, because you'll be able to spot it in 4 minutes of conversation. Ace brings up the mechanics lien process himself before you ask. He sits down at the contract stage and says more or less, you're going to get some notices in the mail. Here's what they are. Here's why they're a good sign. And here's how I handle the releases at every draw, so you never have to wonder. He does that because he's been doing this a long time, and he knows that an informed homeowner is a fast-paying homeowner. There's no friction at draw time when everybody understood the rules in week one. That's the bar. If your contractor volunteers this conversation, you have found somebody who has done this before and intends to do it right. The lien system only turns adversarial when payments stop. When the money moves the way it's supposed to, it's just plumbing. It runs quietly in the background and nobody really thinks about it. Your job is to keep money moving and collect the paper that proves it did. All right, so Let's bring it home here. Recap. A lien is a legal claim against your property for unpaid labor or materials, and it can come from people you've never hired, which means paying your contractor in full is not by itself protection. The preliminary notice is your early warning system. It's not an accusation. It's a roster of who could make a claim, and you keep every one of them in a single folder. The lien release is the habit that makes you safe. Money goes out, the signed paper comes back, and you aim to end up holding unconditional lien releases. Recording completion at the end starts the clock that closes your exposure, and you reconcile your entire folder before final payment leaves your hands. And ask the question early. Tell me more about pre-liens and releases and how your company handles them. Because how a contractor answers that tells you a great deal about how they run their business. There's a free download for you in the show notes for this episode. It walks you through exactly what to collect and when, so you're not trying to remember any of this at draw time, so you can grab it for free. If you want the full written treatment, this is the section 3.314 of my book, The Awakened Homeowner. The link is in the show notes along with everything else. And if you're planning a project right now and you want a place to keep all of this organized instead of scattered across your kitchen counter, come take a look at what we're building at buildquest.co. And if you know somebody who is mid-project right now or about to write a big draw check, send them this episode. This is exactly the kind of thing nobody tells you until it's too late. And I read every question that comes in. My email's in the show notes, and your questions genuinely shape these episodes. So this is actually closing out section I call the rule of construction. We've covered contracts and estimates and contracting methods, insurance risk, and now liens. And I'm going to start to move into, I don't think I've covered this yet, but it's about building your team, who you actually surround yourself with, and how those choices get made is the single biggest lever you have on how this whole thing turns out. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. As always, I'm Bill Reid, your home building coach, and I'm here to enlighten, empower, and protect you. Let's go make it happen.